Welcome you all for today's Indian's Forensic Psychiatry program. Today we have with us Dr. Rajendra KM, who is Assistant Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, who will be taking today's session on POCSO Act of 2012. Over to you, Dr. Rajendra.
As you all know, today's topic is regarding the existing act, which is POCSO Act. The full form is Protection of Children from Sexual Offences. So it came into rule by 2012, but it has been recently amended in August 2019 also. So today, around first 30-35 minutes, I will focus on giving you the information under subheadings regarding this act, which will be useful in a theoretical aspect and also in the practical aspects while you want to see those cases or evaluate them. So it will focus both on theoretical aspect and the practical aspects. To begin with, I will cover the presentation based on like why this act came into existence. What does this act contain in itself? Based on what principles each stakeholder should respond to the child who has been a victim and to the family, and what can be the clinical and forensic role of a mental health professional, to be specific, a psychiatrist. Under these headings, I will try to cover the topics. Coming to the background, like maybe a decade back, there was a detailed survey which was done among 1/3 of Indian states, where the prevalence of abuse report was significantly high, amounting to 50%. And it was equally distributed among boys and girls. And 21% had reported the severe form of abuse. This is setting the context like there was problem which was existing, which was in a higher degree or higher level existing in the society. So this is the existing problem in the society or context. Before 2012, what were the legal acts which used to address these grievances? So they were not very clearly defined. They were not age sensitive. There were 3 sections: rape, modesty of women was outraged, or unnatural offences. Under these 3 headings only, under these 3 IPC sections only, the registration of FIR can be done, and following which the trial regarding the offence will be carried out. As you know, it was not so comprehensive and effective in itself. At the same time, we also know that the male victims were not alluded to in a detail, and the modesty was not elaborately explained. So there were many deficits in the existing law to manage the current concerns which were existing and which have been gotten to know by the survey. And there were also many other cases in different states which also had pointed out to this lacunae in the existing law. Keeping the international standards, there was an act which became a draft. Whole process started in 2008, but the act came into existence in 2012. So what does this POCSO Act means? This is mainly for children to help them from being victim from the stage of reporting to stage of ensuring their safety and development, to ensure that their voice is heard in the investigations agency, in the judiciary, so that it has been addressed in a very child-friendly fashion. You can think that it was a major revamp in the law itself. To briefly tell, it was a comprehensive law for the protection of child from the sexual offences. They are categorized into 3: sexual assault, harassment, and pornography, and safeguarding the child in each state, as I reported, from reporting to the end of the trial in the special court to the rehabilitation process. This act involved many stakeholders and it defined roles of many stakeholders who will be interacting with this child in the process of evaluation, reporting, investigation, and also while the case is heard in the court. This act, any act you have, you will have the act proper and the rules. The act is a draft of what is the violation of the existing law, how it is defined, and what is the punishment given, and how the proceedings should be carried out in this regard of offense. The rules will give much more details regarding the acts. Whenever you read an act, it is also important that you also read through the rules of the act. So we set the background like how it came to existence and what it wants to address. It wants to address children who have experienced abuse, to support them, to ensure their safety, to ensure their development and rehabilitation from the beginning of victimhood to the end of she or he will be able to get the justice and also rehabilitate himself effectively back into society and heal himself. As it said, it is by 2012 it is in existence, and there is a progress which has been made in different stakeholders to sensitize and to understand. Coming to the chapter, it contains 9 chapters. Easy way to remember is that yes, there is a preliminary definitions regarding the offense, the age, and the punishment, and the personnel involved in the acts. Next is what is sexual assault and what is punishment. Means what is the crime and what is the punishment for it. Third chapter is also what is the crime and what is the punishment. It is like using the child for pornographic purposes and punishment. So second and third chapter deal with the crime, how the crime is defined, and what is the punishment for it. The fourth is if someone is having an intent or attempt or someone is abetting, that also is considered as an offense because there is an intent to it. So thus the first, second to fourth chapter deals with crime and their punishments. Next is fifth and sixth chapter, that what is the role of reporting from police to any other person involved in the case. Next, how the recording of statement and how the child should be held from the police personnel. So this is regarding reporting and investigation, which should be child friendly. So the fifth and sixth chapter is child friendly reporting and process of investigation, ensuring the child rights. Seventh is there are special courts set up for this act, which will allow the child to have a child friendly atmosphere, not to be exposed to a perpetrator, not to be anxious in those situations, and also record their statements. These courts also have timeline in which they need to work. Like 1 month, the child statement should have been done in the court. By 1 year, the trial should be finished. The last 2 chapters about what are the special courts, procedures and evidence. And the last chapter is miscellaneous, like who should monitor this act, who should monitor the implementation, how should they report. That comes under State and National Child Rights Protection Commission. So overall, there are 9 chapters. Initial chapters cover about offenses and punishment. Middle chapters cover about the procedures and the way in which those procedures should be carried out, from reporting to investigation to a trial. Then what are the facilities the child can avail from the existing resources, what are the procedures for those, and who should monitor. This is an outline of the chapters. Coming to the principles, for example, when some victim is there to us in a clinic, or we need to respond to a question for us, for any of our colleague, based on what principles our action or our response or our evaluation should be dependent on. So these are the 12 set of principles which has been listed in a guidelines provided by Women and Child Development Department Ministry from central government in 2013. So they all talk about giving safety, ensuring adequate dignity, making the child informed in the process, ensuring the privacy, ensuring the rehabilitation process. So I want you to focus on the 4 highlighted things. Our focus should be that the child should be safe whenever we have come across a victim. Is the victim is safe? That is the first. Second is, whatever the child reveals, it should be the privacy should be maintained. The respect and dignity for those difficult should be maintained. Then the child and family have a right to be informed about what is the existing procedures and laws based on which they can make their decisions. So these highlighted points are the key principles in which we need to interact clinically, but we need to take account of all the principles when we want to act according to this roles, according to the acts in our clinical roles or in our forensic roles. These are the principles we need to look back to when we have any queries or doubts, like how and on what context and what basis I need to respond. If we look back to these principles, we will get the answers more clearer. Coming to the second part of it, in the act details, what are the offenses and what are the punishments? So as I said, there are 3 types of crimes when it related to sexual offenses. One is penetrative, means sexual assault. It can be penetrative or non-penetrative. Second is sexual harassment. Third is using children for pornography. So these are the 3 main headings. In penetrative abuse, there is penetrative sexual assault, aggravated penetrative sexual assault. The aggravated means in which the person who was responsible has committed the crime, or the crime also involved many other difficulties or processes in which the child has been intimidated. It has happened in the gang format, the child has been raped, or the child has need to develop the illness, which can be a mental illness or a physical illness like sexual transmitted diseases, because of which the child needs to suffer more because of the crime. So those all come under aggravated penetrative sexual assault. So this is penetrative and aggravated penetrative. Then sexual assault and aggravated sexual assault. Aggravated sexual assault is the person or a system which needs to care for the child has been accused of it, or there are other parameters in which the act has been considered to be more severe or caused more harm to the well-being of the child physically or mentally. Aggravated sexual assault. Second is sexual harassment. Then third is use of children for pornographic purposes. So when it comes to the punishment, as I said, the act came into existence in 2012, but there has been an amendment in August 2019. So initially the imprisonment was for 7 years, and for aggravated it was 10 years. The change which has been made is now the 7 has been replaced by 10 years for penetrative sexual assault, and there is additional clause. If the child is below 16 years, then the imprisonment will be not less than 20 years. It is for both penetrative and aggravated penetrative sexual abuse. It also alludes that the death penalty can also be given to that perpetrator. So this is the quantum of punishment. Coming to the sexual assault, there is like 2 years increase in the punishment duration. And regarding the sexual harassment and pornography, the punishment severity to some extent remains the same. We need to be also aware of the August approved amendment regarding the POCSO Act, where the quantum of punishment has been raised, and even for penetrative abuse below 16 years, the imprisonment is not less than 20 years, and it can also be life term or it can be a death sentence. So these are the crimes and these are the punishments. Now, the Act also defines the roles of each stakeholder who comes across evaluation of the child, to the investigation, to the judicial process of court hearing, the trial process, and also the rehabilitation process. So we need to be aware regarding the duties of a police officer, the role of child welfare committee, the role of non-government organization or support person, how they can avail according to the Act, what is the role of medical professionals, role of special courts and public prosecutor. Role of medical professions I will allude to in the end as a clinician role and a forensic role. The rest four I will try to present it in a continuous manner in a clubbed fashion. I will give mainly the main points which we need to remember during our clinical situations. Coming to this chart shows that whenever there is an event, so it should be reported to the juvenile police unit or a local police. It should be under the section of 19 of the POCSO Act. And the police also will record the statement within 24 hours. Then the police also assess that after the recording, they will get the child evaluated by a medical professional within 24 hours. They will also take the child to a judge, magistrate, for recording of the statement in front of the judge. They will also assess the safety of the child back in their home environment, or if they suspect that family is involved, they will take steps to ensure the protection of the child. They will produce the child to the child welfare committee within 3 days, and the child welfare committee will decide based on the assessment they carry out or with the help of social worker that they can place the child back home or the child should be placed in a child welfare center. Next is the special court will take the cognizance and try to work through it, the case, and monitor it. Once the child welfare committee comes into the picture and child has been produced, the child welfare committee will take care of safety, developmental needs, and rehabilitation process. It will ensure that there is a fit person who can care this child, or they will place the child in a child care institute. They will provide the psychosocial support. They can also have a ability to assign a support person. The support person is a person who will be assigned through an NGO who will aid or assist the family and the child from the process of reporting to from the hearing in the court to the end of the trial. And he will be a person who will be educated and who will explain to the family and help the family to liaison with different services so that the family can get an adequate support. This to facilitate the rehabilitation, CWC can assign a support person. Next is in the court, there will be in the court or during the recording, the child has a difficulty in language or developmental issues, a translator, a special educator can be used. Then the child will not face the accused. The child can claim for compensation for her rehabilitation by giving an application, or child judge itself, he can grant it. Then the prosecution, they will have a facility to avail if they can't afford a legal help. The special public prosecutor will help this family and child to fight for their justice and to stand and argue for their case. This is an overall outline of procedure of different stakeholders, especially the police personnel, the child welfare committee personnel, and the judiciary and the lawyer personnel. Coming to the process or the procedure the police should follow. This process and procedure which has been explained in the Act is carrying out the whole process in a child-friendly atmosphere, in a child-friendly manner, and to record it in an elaborate fashion, and also to ensure that the family, the child and the parents have a copy of it. So if you track the picture, you can see that the woman officer should preferably record it. It can be in a child's place, home, or in a comfortable place. Language should be as spoken by the child. It should be done in presence of a trusted guardian or an adult, followed by production to the medical examination. They can use audio or video devices if needed. The recorded statement should be read out to the child and parents, and a copy also should be provided. This is the first investigation report or a statement following which first investigation report will be filed. This is the same due process in which, in a child-friendly manner, the judge also should be interviewing the child in a non-threatening and child-friendly manner in presence of a caretaker. Coming to the medical part, I will skip it for now. No, I will elaborate it in detail now. So as I said, in medical we have two roles, maybe three roles if you take. One, as a medical personnel, as an MBBS graduate. Second, as a mental health professional. As a mental health professional, what is your clinical role and what is your forensic role? Whenever there is a case, as a mental health professional, the context in which child will come is different from for a professional who is a gynecologist, in which context the child has been brought. In psychiatry, we will not get the acute assault cases. We tend to get the cases who have experienced abuse in the past, in the recent past, or in the remote past, and they have had some psychopathology because of it, and they have sought help. But we also can face a situation when we are out of a system or we are practicing alone. So it is better we know, are aware of every aspects of it from a medical practitioner perspective to a mental health perspective. As it mentioned, the taking a consent is important. If they need not to take a consent, if the child is having a serious medical condition, and it should be addressed first. So then it is providing the first aid, then the history and examination, then comes a forensic part of it, like you will collect the evidence and also you will document the details regarding the acquisition, and also you will provide the treatment for the possible risks and in the infection or for the pregnancy, and also for psychological health and physical health. You have medical role, forensic role, and a mental health professional role. As a clinician role, one is medical treatment. Second is we need to carry out the mental health assessment. Does child has PTSD? Our child has acute stress reaction? Does child have depression? So we need to evaluate and treat it accordingly. We also need to carry out a developmental assessment, that does child have age appropriate social, emotional, cognitive and language abilities. And the last but the most important part of it is we should be able to inform the child and the family about what does the law say and what are the procedures, so that they can be better informed and make decisions for themselves than pushing them for making decisions on others' behalf. Coming to the part of consent. So when it comes to consent, the consent should be taken for the four aspects. One is to examine the child, one is to collect the evidence, one is to give the treatment for the medical problems, third is to report, fourth is for reporting. So we need to take four consents. Means we need to elaborate in consent with all these four aspects, and we need to take the consent for separately for all of this. If the child is above 12 years, the child's consent is a must. If the child is below 12 years, the child and guardian's consent is a must. If the child has developmental difficulties, then we need to take the consent of the parent or a guardian. So the consent involves the evaluation process, the treatment process, the evidence collection process, and the reporting process. So consent is of four types. Whenever we have a case, we need to take this consent for all these aspects, and we need to be able to give medical treatment or have enough medical knowledge to provide what is needed for the child. So when it comes to the medical treatment part, other than providing the first aid for the injuries. First 72 hours are crucial to give prophylaxis for HIV, then prophylaxis for hepatitis B, then comes treatment. This is a part of it, and a guidelines from the National Health and Family Welfare has given guidelines like what can be used for the treatment that I will be showing further. So this is the medical part of it. Next, as a medical doctor, you have a responsibility wherever you are working to explain the examination and evidence collection process. The examination itself is evidence gathering, also collecting the specimens. This also should be explained to the child and parents, and the examination should be done in the presence of parents, preferably by a female doctor, and that should also be recorded. This is the second part of it. And there are set guidelines to examine the private parts of a male or female child, and based on what findings, what impression can be made. These guidelines are also existing. This is the medical forensic part, or as a MBBS graduate, what you should do in a medical part, or as a forensic part of being a medical graduate. So that is the medical treatment part. It was difficult for me to allude only to clinical role and not to step onto the forensic role. So I have touched upon briefly about the forensic role, but the medical aspect of providing the first aid, reducing the risk for exposure of sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy is a priority. So we should be able to help the family and also get the evaluation and treatment for those aspects. So that is one part of medical treatment. Second is about a mental health professional. What is your role? That you assess the mental health status. The manifestation can be varied from being not affected by the event to having severe reaction of stress to the same. Also, you need to understand what is the family situation, their capabilities, their support and their knowledge, and how is it affecting the child. Based on it, you need to provide brief psychological assistance on that moment, and also you should be able to provide the adequate and necessary information which is existing in the law to them. So this is, and providing the treatment for the mental health part is the part of mental health professional to assess the mental health, to carry out the developmental assessment and to provide treatment. So the guidelines has been there, what treatment can be given, what medication can be given, at what dose. So at the end of the topic, the whole documents which has been used for this reference or presentation will be shared, so that these references can be used, which are standard and which are published in the government domain. This alludes to the medical treatment. Coming to the forensic role, whenever we are doing anything which involves a medical legal case, recording the name, address, age as reported by them as per date of birth or as a legal document, the sex of the child, date and time, and also the accompanying person details are a must. So anything related to a case, anything related to victim evaluation should start with this. Next is, as I said, informed consent. As you are not dealing with an acute emergency where you need to take 4 consents, but you need to take consent for even recording the evidence or even information. So in mental health context, you may need to get a consent to report to the police personnel, and you may also need to take a consent for carrying out an interview if you have been asked for to do so. That is the first part of it. So as I said, the child and family has to decide regarding all the aspects of treatment to the evidence collection to the reporting. The clause 19 of the POCSO Act makes it clear that any person who is responsible involving a clinician must report the case to a concerned police nearby station, and if he is failed to do so, the punishment can extend from 6 months to a year. So this creates some amount of distress or difficulties and dilemmas regarding the ethics when we face the situations. So I will allude that to how this can be carried out. The reporting is not that yes or no, like I will do, I will not do. Yes, we need to do and we are responsible. But how you will do as per the directions given by the government, but also in a child-friendly manner is the approach you need to take. So as I said, you got to know and you need to record the event. So when you are record the event, there are 5 aspects you need to ask: where, when, who, what, how. So you need whatever the description the child gives, it should contain all these details. If it is one attempt of being sexually abused, or it is multiple attempt, based on that, whatever the child says, you need to explore those in the context of who, where, when, how, and what has been done with the child. Under these settings, if you cover whatever the child says in the verbatim, that is first level of documentation you have done. Next is the part of reporting, where you need to explain your role and also take the family through a process, because as the sex and sexuality involves lot of privacy or many issues in the personal context, or many importance in the personal context, family context and social context, you need to help them to understand the help, the procedure, and their capability to decide where and how what to be done. So when you do this, or when you want to face this situation, there are 2 aspects which are important. One is ensuring the safety. Second is ensuring your responsibility and that the child and family can approach for the justice process. The safety comes first. Like when you report as a process, you explain them they need to be done. If the family and child are significantly troubled and it can affect the family's situation or the child's mental health, you need to record those processes in the file, and you can take time to explain the child and family that what they can do, what they need not to do, and why they need not to worry when they go to justice. Once you've done this process, you have explained them that they have a right to say yes or no for an FIR. You need to inform the police in 2 manners. One is that they have consented for informing. One is that they have refused to provide the inform. But the event details will not go, but the event that has occurred possibly will reach the police. After that, police will talk to the child and the family, and the child and family have their capability to make the decision about how to proceed or not. And if you take an help of NGO or child welfare committee and help, that it will not happen in a public space and it will not have lot of stigma which is involved, most of the family will be able to convince by giving the adequate information, adequate knowledge, and providing the all information regarding the acts and what you need to do and what they can do. We can make them agree and take consent and then report to the concerned police personnel. So this is regarding the reporting. So when you have a doubt, talking to a colleague, have a opinion, have a consensus of discussion, documenting it is also very much useful in clinical scenarios. So next is when the child has been referred to you for inquiry of abuse. So if there is a request made to you by a judicial body or from an investigation body like police or the judge, you need to exercise your acumen as a mental health professional to record the statement regarding the child abuse to assist the child as a victim to get the justice to the best possible way. So it starts with 5 stages the interview can be carried out, in which you will introduce yourself and get to know a child briefly. Then you will take steps to ensure that the child is reporting accurately. Means child can understand what is false, what is true. Child can understand and say that I didn't understand what you asked. And also child can intrude or stop the interviewer when he or she feels that it is right or wrong. So means you are ensuring in the interview process that the child duly understands what is truth, what is false. Child knows that she can ask for clarifications, and also she can cross check with the or even give responses which are contradictory to the person who is interviewing. Next is abuse inquiry proper, in which it will explain a event regarding memory regarding an event and how they can process and narrate it as a sequence. After that exercise, you can carry out the abuse its inquiry itself, and it should be with open-ended questions with focusing on information regarding who, where, what, how, when. So to detailedly record it as verbatim, and it can be also told to the child. Then you can gently probe in an open-ended manner if need any clarification. Last is you will explain the child, you will end the conversation, and you will also close the sessions with some ways in which child will get into a positive emotional states by a play activity, by a relaxing activity. Because as the child has narrated traumatic events, if you don't close the session, that difficulty or trauma can continue with the child. So this is a forensic role as assisting the judiciary or investigating body to ensure the inquiry process and to give a statement regarding the child's statement. So as there are three aspects in forensic role, one is medical evidence collection and medical examination of the genital parts, which we less often do, but we should be aware, and if the situation arises, we should be able to do as per the standard guidelines and also provide the medical treatment if necessary. Second is, as a mental health professional, you need to evaluate for developmental abilities and the psychological health, and how you can provide the first level of help to the child and family, and also treatment if needed. Third, as a forensic person or as a role as a clinician, how you can deal with the reporting part of it, how you can make it a process involving the family, and then give adequate information so that they are prepared enough to continue to seek the help. The fourth is, if in the forensic role, if you have been asked to carry out an inquiry, in what steps and how you can structure the whole process of interview, and how you can go about recording the interview. So with this, I will end my presentation. So meanwhile, I want to share what are the references I have used. One is for the acts, you can refer to National Commission of Protection of Child Rights, which gives the PDFs for the acts and also the existing rules. Then there is a guideline protocol from the Women and Child Development and also from the Health and Family Welfare Development. Then there is also a user handbook from the National Child Protection Commission. So the law states that each state should come up with a book which will assist all the professionals to carry out those procedures in the forensic or clinical context. Recently, there has been a book which has been published in Karnataka. I need to get a hold on that soft copy. If I get through, I will definitely share with you all people. And the article which I have referred is from Shekhar Desadri sir, which has been published in Indian Journal of Psychiatry as a supplement. So these all references will also be shared. So hope I have answered the theoretical aspect to it, that how, in what context this law came, what crimes it addresses, what are the punishments, how this law is different from others in taking a child-friendly approach from the process of reporting to process of getting justice to the level of rehabilitation. In this, what are the roles and responsibilities of the each stakeholder? And as a stakeholder, what is the role of a medical professional, being a medical treatment or giving a forensic evidence, and as a mental health professional? So thank you, and we'll open it for discussion.
Sir, is it mandatory for a clinician to inform the police even though the family and the child refuses that they don't want to report the event to the police?
To answer this question in yes or no versus how, yes sir, according to the section 19 of the act, any responsible citizen, not only a clinician, even a parent, even a caretaker, even a school person, are mandatory report. So reporting happens in two contexts in clinical situation, where they say acute, that the assault has happened yesterday or day before or within a 7 days of time and child has come, or it has happened in recent or remote past and it has been told to you during the clinical evaluation. In both contexts you need to report, but the reporting process will be different in each scenario. So in acute situation, you may need to spend more time to explain their rights and their decision making capacity so that they can execute them with investigation or judiciary agency. But at the same time, you explain your stance and report it immediately. When it is in remote or recent past, which is more than a month or so, you take time to explain, to take the family into the confidence, and then to get it reported. So the reporting is the second part, but educating the family that they have a right to get evaluation, they have a right to get the evidence collected, they have a right to get medically examined, is the three rights they have. Reporting and case making they can decide later also. Means if you report to the police also, making a case or not is left to them, but they should have an adequate information that my medical examination, my evidence collection, my examination report doesn't mean that it is a police case, but the reporting will be done and she and the family will decide what to take on. So giving this information, preparing them enough, approaching it based on the context in which it is acute versus as a clinical information which brought out, is how we can approach. But yes, we need to report, but not to coerce them, but to persuade them with adequate and enough information. And physical examination and evidence collection becomes very important within 5 days, but we can take a time gap of 10 to 15 days. If there is an event, then we need to take it more seriously for evidence collection part and those details. But if there is a good amount of time lag, then you can take time to explain, prepare, and then refer and then inform.
Okay. The question is that do each case of sexual assault needs to be examined by a psychiatrist?
Right. So it depends on the setting. The answer for this question depends on a setting. For example, you are the only medical personnel available in that setting, yes, you need to. If as a part of mental professional you assess you will not cause any harm, but it will help the child and the family to understand the complexity of process by your advice. But if you are in a system, then it is more a gynecologist and forensic specialist who will take care of this medical part of it and medical treatment part of it. And if they need, they will refer the case to you. The pediatrician or a gynecologist may refer a case to you that he needs mental health assessment. If not, they will take due process and they will carry out the procedure. Yes, psychiatrists need to, when he is alone in a setup where he needs to, and there is no other medical team available. To some extent, yes, but when other teams are available, he can take up the professional, mental health professional role than a medical professional role, being an undergraduate. Please.
Can you explain what is informed refusal? I didn't understand that. But when you say it's mandatory to report, what is that informed refusal term means?
Means like there are two processes in which there is an event and you need to report it to police. And different hospitals will develop the different format of it. In each format, you can give that so and so child has come and it has reported, this case has been reported to you under the section of 19 as per POCSO Act. And child and family has refused to give consent to informing the police. This is the statement. It goes when child and family refuse to inform to police. Means it will not carry the elaborate details regarding the accused or the event or the evidence, but the fact that there is an incident and an occurrence in this child, in this family, that will reach the police, versus being informed consent to inform the police. You will write that so and so person accused and so event has been alleged. So the amount of information you send across to the police and the details of it will be decided by the child and caretaker. Can be decided by the child and caretaker. So this guidelines of Health and Family Welfare Ministry gives those details. You can go through it.
What is the role of professional if an adult reports history of child abuse?
It has been like, for example, the act was not existence before 2012. So it is the child. POCSO Act defines that it is for children. If the adult has said and it has happened after 2012, yes, you may need to tell them that you need to report. But it is the decision of reporting, because he is also an adult. I think he can take a call. There is no clear answer for this to give a yes or no answer for you. Because of my maybe less practical exposures with adult, it may be difficult to give an answer, but preferably, but not a right answer. I can get back to you regarding this. That if the person is an adult and if he has reported, I think he has all the capacity to make a decision to report it or not. And he is not a child anymore, and he will be a decision maker. But as per the law, you may need to, but you can make it as informed refusal, and he can take it that he can decide to register an FIR or not. But I am not very clear about it. But if an adult who has reported it and this event has happened beyond 2012, yes, I may need to discuss this and tell him and allow him to decide, and then take to the process of information. And if he's an adult and this has been an event which has happened before the act has come into the existence, I think it can be more clearly said that he can decide the whole aspect of it.
Dr. Rajendra, in continuation with the previous question, what would happen if an adult comes and says, or anybody comes and says, that I know of a person who has been abused like this, my neighbor, or I'm a school teacher and I know that my colleague is abusing a child here. So when somebody else comes and tells that, and the child has not come and reported to us, but we know that it's not a fact, but we have come to know that somebody else has reported it. So what do in that?
Like Chetan has asked a relevant question, and also I think this point I missed in my presentation. When you make a notes or write an answer in an exam, the point to allude the role of child welfare committee and how you can approach it, and also the helpline, the child helpline 1098 in a reverse order from 1 to 10. It is 1098. You can reach out to this child helpline number and you can report this, whatever the concerns or situations. This team will always work in sync with District Child Protection Unit. They will take this forward, and I think in your theoretical answer, this aspect should also be written and highlighted.
Thank you, Anand, for your participation. Before we end the program, I would like to thank Linux Laboratories for their support through their educational grant.